Erev Tov and Chodesh Tov, everyone. It is still Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, so it's wonderful to have you all here. The topic for tonight's class, the future of modern Orthodoxy. And there's multiple ways we can approach it. One way to talk about the future of modern Orthodoxy is you could just ask me what I'm doing in 5 years, but I'm not so vain to think that I'm the future of it. But the reality is you could break modern Orthodoxy down into kind of three classes. Historically, what modern Orthodoxy was, what it is at present, and then what it'll be in the future. Now, we're going to focus on some of the challenges and possibilities of what modern Orthodoxy can be in the future. The challenges of the first two parts is modern Orthodoxy today does not have one definition. There are certain themes that will kind of come out in this class that are common to groups that identify as modern Orthodox, but whereas in the 1950s, you had a flagship institution, Yeshiva University, under the guise of Rabbi Joseph Dobert Soloveitchik Zatzal, who was just, a brilliant writer and rabbi, and he really was, whatever he said was what modern Orthodoxy is. Now, his legacy in many ways still defines it, particularly in Boston. There's a Maimonides, a school there for elementary and middle school, and they're still one of the preeminent modern Orthodox institutions, but Yeshiva University today no longer identifies as modern Orthodox. And in many ways, that'll come out maybe in some of these articles, is the rabbis there really don't represent anything about modern Orthodoxy. So the state of modern Orthodoxy today is both in flux and very fragmented. And we'll come back at the end, the last article, talking about, who might be the future leaders of it. So the state of modern Orthodoxy today is kind of a mess, depending on who you ask, even though there's still a lot of beautiful things about it. And in terms of what it was, there's also not one clear historical development, because modern Orthodoxy, in many ways, is a response to the change to American Judaism, to the realities of the time. The simple historical definition, that it started sometime in the late 1800s. You could say one of the earliest proponents of it was Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And these German rabbis were basically post-Enlightenment at that point, significantly, it was early 1800s, and the rise of science, the rise of academics, a general rejection of religion. And the question is, could Judaism respond to this new scientific way of thinking, this new academic way of thinking with archaeology, study of languages, hyper-rationalist minds? Could Judaism respond to that? Should Judaism respond to that? And their answer to those questions was yes. Judaism can and should respond to modernity, and not fighting against modernity and saying, how can we defeat all their arguments, but rather embracing those tools. Can the ideas of enlightenment, again, the scientific way of studying different topics, can that actually enhance Torah? And there was a movement in Germany, Wissenschaft des Judentum, which essentially was a school that used scientific, academic, scholarly ways to enhance the study of Torah. And modern Orthodoxy today embraces that. But again, it's so much more than that. It's about having an observant, spiritual, fulfilled, life of Orthodoxy, fully being engaged in Torah, but also fully being engaged in the world and seeing value in it. And what these articles will show is that tension of, can I balance my Orthodoxy with my modernity? So maybe I can go see the opera, which is not a distinctly Jewish thing, but I'm not going to see it on Shabbat. Okay, that's an easy one. But what if in the opera there are women's solos? So there's all these kind of questions about engaging with society. And those questions, and this is really important, every denomination deals with those questions. The Reform movement did not start to destroy or upend, get rid of Judaism. It came to respond to the challenges of modernity. Now, the way they responded to it is not the way that modern Orthodoxy does. That's not the way conservative Judaism or Reconstructionists, everyone took a different path responding to it. I decided to be part of the modern Orthodox group, even though I was raised conservative. But again, every single movement is trying to respond to modernity in their own way. And so what we'll look at tonight is 4 short pieces or selections of articles, and it covers 18 years. The first one is 2004, and the last one is, I think, December 2022. So fairly recent, talking about what are the challenges and possibilities of modern Orthodoxy. And it'll be interesting for us to pay attention to What are the common themes and challenges that have been there all along? What are some new things that might, start to pop up later? And at the end, we'll kind of, see if we can pick out the things that stick out to us about what modern Orthodoxy can and perhaps should be. So with that, Leon, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And this first article is from 2004 from a magazine called Jewish Action, which is published by the Orthodox Union. Now, all of these, organizations have certainly changed over the last 20 years, but the Orthodox Union, typically, if you wanted to, pigeonhole it, would be a little bit more to the right, more we might call black hat rabbis, although they are members who are more modern, although that might be changing, but they represent not ultra-Orthodox cloistered Judaism. They represent orthodoxy that's somewhat engaged with the world. How much that is depends on, who's the head of it at the time. So go ahead. And again, the title of this article is The Future of Modern Orthodoxy in America. Go ahead, please, Leon.
At the time of the first Zionist Congress in 1897, barely 1% of the world's Jewish population lived in, I believe you should say, the land of Israel. Today, nearly 40% of the world's Jews live here. Oh, it's from Israel, here. The Hebrew language has been revived, and Israel today is a thriving center of Torah learning. Can you imagine the impact that even a small percentage of the best modern Orthodox leaders could have were they living in Israel? Can you envision the possibility of a critical mass of families like the Blooms, literally turning this country into a light unto the nations, and ultimately bringing about the true fulfillment of Ki Sion Tetzei Torah, even if it is a loss to Detroit and to American modern Orthodoxy?
So the context of this article is there's a rabbi, I think his name might be mentioned below, and he wrote an article saying that a lot of young, bright modern Orthodox rabbis are all making aliyah. They're moving to Israel, and that's going to destroy modern Orthodoxy. If we really want a future of modern Orthodoxy, they need to stay here in the States. And what this article is going to respond to that. And the way it was structured was actually, half a dozen responses from different rabbis. I didn't include them all because at some point they were all kind of saying the same, or scholars, they're all kind of saying similar things, but that's the premise of the article. Modern Orthodoxy is going to suffer if all of its adherents move to Israel. So go ahead, please. I could go back to being
a day school principal in the United States, have Sundays off, and make the kind of money I can't even dream of earning here. I gather here is in Israel.
You're correct. He is the author is in Israel writing this, responding to the rabbi from America.
Instead, I choose to be part of the unfolding destiny of our people in the land of our ancestors. The mental acrobatics required for Rabbi Spolter to describe Aliyah as an ominous sign for the American modern Orthodox community, while at the same time as something that helps us reach the ultimate redemption, reflects a challenging internal conflict within modern Orthodoxy today. If you look at the mission statement of almost any modern Orthodox school in America, you will likely find some expressed desire to impart a commitment not only to the land of Israel, but also to the state of Israel. If you walk into most modern Orthodox shuls on Shabbat morning, you will hear the prayer for the welfare of the state of Israel being recited. There is no question that modern Orthodoxy is virtually synonymous with religious Zionism. While more modern Orthodox leaders making Aliyah means fewer of the bleeding communities in North America, this cannot be viewed as an external threat to modern Orthodoxy, but rather as an internal ideological tension. The following questions are ones that need to be seriously considered. How does American modern Orthodoxy ultimately envision itself? Do we view modern Orthodoxy in America as a permanent fixture, as a Rome that will always coexist with Jerusalem? Why has religious Zionism become a central tenet of modern Orthodox ideology? Is this coincidental, or are the two movements related fundamentally? Our community generally affirms the religious significance of the state of Israel, seeing it as Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu,
yeah.
Beginning of the flowering of redemption. Does this concept carry with it any practical obligations? If so, do we say that Aliyah is the best way to contribute to the rebuilding of the modern state of Israel, or is supporting the state spiritually, financially, and politically sufficient? Once we have considered how or whether answers to these questions can be integrated into one holistic ideology, can we approach the crisis in leadership in our community from a philosophically harmonious perspective without investing in solutions that undermine our most precious values?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Leon. So this goes to one of the big questions about modern Orthodoxy, which is that, what makes modern Orthodoxy special? And a huge part of our identity of the modern Orthodox movement is a love of Israel. But what does that mean? Is modern Orthodoxy's ultimate goal to get all Jews to move to Israel? And one of the things that's kind of behind this is the idea of modern Orthodoxy, of an Orthodox observant Judaism engaged with modernity, worked, I don't know if it worked really well, but it worked fairly well in Europe until most of European Jews were decimated. But then that kind of, the spiritual successor to that, of engaging with modernity, but also a fully engaged observant Judaism, has really taken off in America, relatively speaking. Orthodoxy is still a small percentage of Jews, and modern Orthodoxy a smaller percentage, but as a movement, particularly in the 50s, 60s, post the 67 war, modern Orthodoxy has been really, really successful. But it couldn't necessarily exist and thrive the same way in Israel. The way Orthodoxy is in Israel is very different. And he made a line here. He said, modern Orthodoxy is virtually synonymous with religious Zionism. That is, I don't know if that was ever true, but it's definitely not true today. A lot of people say, oh, the religious Zionists in Israel, that's basically modern Orthodoxy there. Not at all. They are essentially ultra-Orthodox, but they support the state. But our modern Orthodoxy, where we're down to earth, where we wear, shirts that are blue and not just white, we don't wear fedora hats, where we engage with society and listen to music and go to university, all of these different things that are part of modern Orthodoxy, you're not going to find that with religious Zionism in Israel. So the kind of intellectually rich movement that modern Orthodoxy is may not be as successful in Israel, but it's interesting. When I studied in Israel at the school, it was non-denominational school, but not all, but most of the teachers were modern Orthodox. But all they were doing, or not all they were doing, every class, they basically tried to convince the students that they should make Aliyah. But if they did, I don't know that modern Orthodoxy would be successful there, continue there. It doesn't make as much sense the way Israel is certainly today, and I don't know about 2004. So what's the point of modern Orthodoxy then? Is it to get all of the Jews to go back to Israel, which is something we pray for, going to Israel, building the Beit Mikdash, that's part of Orthodoxy? Or is it to make a really successful Orthodox Judaism, specifically for America, to always be in conversation with Israel? And I think modern Orthodoxy really struggles with that, because we talk about Israel all the time. We're big supporters. Well, what's the best way to support Israel? To move there. So that's one of the big questions about modern Orthodoxy going forward is the goal to keep building up institutions, modern Orthodox institutions in the States, or is the ultimate goal to create the next generation of observant Jews who are down to earth, go to university, and all move to Israel? So there's not really an answer to this, but this is one of the big questions that modern Orthodoxy is and will continue to deal with if it wants to be true to its value system, which is that Israel is at very, very top. The other way we could do it is just making Israel not at the top anymore. Is to say that modern Orthodoxy is being engaged in the world, being fully observant, but we don't want as much to do with Israel. But that's, that doesn't make as much sense either. So any responses or questions on this first article? And then we'll fast forward in time. Excellent. So the second article here from the Tikva Fund, and it's more important, less about where it's published, but then the author. And Jane knows, I don't know if she personally knows Jack Wertheimer, but Jane and her husband Ellis actually recommended this book to me, or a book to me, written by this scholar. It doesn't matter his denomination, but he's very engaged in his Judaism, and he wrote this incredible book a few years ago on basically the state of American Judaism writ large. If you have not read it, check out Jack Wertheimer. It is so well researched, gives an amazing overview. His commentary is superb, but he is, I think, one of the true experts and scholars on where Judaism writ large has gone, is right now, and where it is going. And his article, again, aptly named, The Future of Modern Orthodoxy. So Jane, I'll actually go ahead and unmute you. And again, this is not the full article. You can find all of these online, and this one is from 2014. So we're 10 years later. So please, Jane.
Of the 3% of American Jewry, the modern Orthodox are especially prominent. The wealthiest Jewish denomination, and one with impressive rates of participation in synagogue life and day schools, the modern Orthodox have been able to balance life according to Jewish law with a commitment to secular knowledge and Western culture. But striking such a balance is a difficult thing to do, and modern Orthodoxy faces threats from its right and from its left. From the right, the Haredi community is increasingly relied upon by the modern Orthodox to fulfill a number of communal roles, including instruction.
And I'll say a point there is that if one is modern Orthodox and they want to go to kosher restaurants, kosher markets, who's running? It's all run by the Haredim. It's all run by the ultra-Orthodox because they have generally bigger numbers. And they're the ones that run all these institutions. So anytime you want to do anything Jewish, and he'll talk more about this in the article, you're going to end up with the Haredim, the to the right ultra-Orthodox. Please continue.
Since the passing of Rabbi Soloveitchik from the scene some 30 years ago, the Yeshiva University world has lacked an authoritative figure who personifies for the broader public the synthesis proclaimed in YU's motto of Torah u'Madah. And
I'll just translate. Torah is Torah, Jewish content, and Madah literally just means knowledge, but I think you could translate it also as science. But again, that's what modern Orthodoxy is combining Orthodoxy, the Jewish component, with Madah, knowledge, science of the world. And again, everyone will interpret that a little differently. Some will say, no, it means you're fully Orthodox. Madah just means you're allowed to have a job that's not specifically Torah related. And others will say, no, study a philosopher, of Heidegger, of listening to music by Chopin, like all of these things, of looking at Van Gogh's art, all of these things have value. So there's a bit of a debate about how to interpret that, but Yeshiva University said we can have both. Our rabbis, our smicha, our ordination students should also study education, philosophy, engineering, etc., like that. Please continue.
Meanwhile, a neo-Haredi group of Roshei Yeshiva has planted its flag at YU's Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Rabbinical Seminary, RIETS, which educates, ordains, and shapes the religious and halachic worldview of modern Orthodox rabbis. In addition, modern Orthodox day schools often employ Haredi teachers who likewise communicate their ideology to impressionable students and may encourage them after graduation to attend an Israeli yeshiva or girls' seminary where neo-Haredi perspectives predominate. Of late, some longtime modern Orthodox synagogues have also taken to hiring Haredi or neo-Haredi rabbis to fill their pulpits. And the community as a whole has become dependent on Haredim who fill certain ritually critical roles. Most subversive of all has been the internationalization of the
internalization
of the idea that Haredi Judaism represents the touchstone and arbiter of Orthodox authenticity, period.
If you were to walk into Yeshiva University, and again, this is oversimplification, I was not a student there, so it's not an attack on them. But if you go in there and you look around at the rabbis teaching, pretty much all of them are black hat, beard, stuff like that. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't have modern sensitivities, and this is not a question on their quality as human beings, their sensitivity, their learning of Torah. But there's a lot of things that doesn't really differentiate that school anymore from other mainstream Orthodox, a Chafetz Chaim yeshiva, a traditional black hat yeshiva, when the institution was founded as being modern Orthodox, literally in the colors of their shirts, whether their button-up shirt is going to be long sleeve or short sleeve. These guys are just wearing black and white and hats. And this is what the students are being exposed to. And again, it's not, at the end of this is not about good and evil or right and wrong, not at all. This is about the reality of what modern Orthodoxy will become. And again, as I said, Yeshiva University no longer identifies as modern Orthodox. So it's over. It is no longer the premier flagship modern Orthodox institution. They gave up that identity and now they identify as centrist Orthodoxy. So that's what happened. You got these neo-Haredi, as Jack Wertheimer identifies them, teachers, and that's it. The nature of it changed. So what's going to happen to modern Orthodoxy? So please continue, Jane, from the left.
From the left, progressive ideologies, especially feminist ones, are inspiring new institutions that are meeting resistance from longer established modern Orthodox institutions. Why the change? Day schools themselves are faulted by some for inadequately preparing their students to cope with the intellectual and moral challenges that they encounter once they enter college. Rabbis on both sides agree that the failure lies in the deliberate neglect of questions of belief, theology, and the why of observance. There is no way fully to prepare Orthodox young people for the transition from their insular and homogeneous environment to the environment of the university, where the reigning values are so at odds with traditional Judaism. On every campus today, incoming students are required to attend an intensive orientation program during which they are exposed to strongly formulated judgments about diversity, tolerance, and correct thinking. In this hothouse atmosphere, how is it possible for Orthodox students to argue in defense of the unequal treatment of women in the domain of religious observance? Can one conceivably emerge from a college experience today without having encountered attitudes towards sexual behavior at odds with traditional Orthodox beliefs? Making it still harder to shelter today's modern Orthodox Jews is that they have strayed beyond the commuter colleges favored by an earlier generation.
So he's pointing out a historical reality that it used to be that you could go to school, go to your classes, and then go home to your kosher household, spend Shabbat with your families. But now kids are living on the campus. So if you want to look at things as very binary, there's only two options. If one is concerned about one being exposed to beliefs or ideas that do not work with Orthodox values, what's the only option? You go to college or you don't. And and again, a university and that kind of education has been one of the milestones of modern Orthodoxy. Modern Orthodox Jews, everybody goes to college. Of course you go to college. It's a value, it's a badge of honor that we have such a high level of both Jewish and secular education. But now as people are progressively moving to the right and the Jewish institutions are being run by these neo-Haredim who are basically setting them up for a value system whereby college is not appropriate for them. And I've met people, I actually met someone who grew up not observant, became Orthodox, had gone to college. I think they might have had a doctorate, and they said they would never send their kids to college because they don't want to expose their children to some of the ideas at college and women and stuff like that. And certainly it sounds absurd, but again, it depends on what your value system is. And it is challenging to be fully observant and to not have one's faith questioned if one goes to college. Now, the flip side is a faith that is unchallenged is often a weak faith. If you want to, make sure that your children never ask questions, then you have to, insulate them completely, lock them away in a community. And that's what the ultra-Orthodox communities are, but that's not modern Orthodoxy. That's antithetical to it. So the question is, how can we maintain this high level of academic, intellectual pursuit, curiosity, questioning, and still maintain the Orthodoxy? And one of the things he's talking about, people like me, not that I'm able, hopefully I'll be able to do it, but my role as an Orthodox rabbi on a college campus is to try and be a resource for these students, to give them space to ask those questions, to validate them, to empower them, to let them know it's okay to both be observant and to, be curious and questioning. But if they're only being told, you got to be 100% observant and anybody questions that, then you're in the wrong place, it doesn't leave them a lot of options. Go ahead, Jane, you want to polish it off?
Thus far, the modern Orthodox world has managed to flourish and persist by creating a community of practice and by focusing most of its intellectual energy on intensified Talmud study. This is not to be minimized. The movement's vibrant communal life, high levels of observance, and serious engagement with traditional texts are monumental achievements. But caught as modern Orthodoxy is between the absolutism and insularity of Haredi Judaism and the realities of an open and radically untraditional American society, are those achievements sufficient to retain a population well integrated into American life and profoundly influenced by its mores, assumptions, and values? The urgent question for modern Orthodoxy is which values can be accommodated without undermining religious commitment and distorting traditional Judaism beyond recognition. And conversely, what losses will be sustained if modern Orthodoxy should undertake more actively to resist the modern world in which its adherents spend most of their waking hours?
Yeah, if it does that, if it continues that resistance, then it's not modern Orthodoxy anymore. One of my teachers, Rav Linzer, said that, the tension of modern Orthodoxy is to both be modern and Orthodox. And if there's a conflict between the two, the goal of the rabbis and the leadership, the men and women, is to try and find an appropriate compromise where both can exist. However, if they cannot exist simultaneously, then the Orthodox takes precedent because we see that as coming from God, from Torah. But the reality is that doesn't come. I mean, if someone says it's a great conflict for me that I can't eat at the Cheesecake Factory, that's you got to deal with that. But the reality is there's not so many conflicts that can't find some sort of resolution between the values of Torah and the values of being part of society. But if the assumption is the way to fix this is just learn more Torah, that's not going to do it. When I taught a class at MIT, when I was interviewing out there, and it was about 20 to 25 of the Orthodox student population, and it was a piece of Talmud, and it was talking about relationships between Jews and non-Jews and ethics and business. And the person who had the job before me said, the students really want a high-level class, a shiur on Talmud. And in that room, I could tell that there were probably 3 or 4, most likely boys, probably a few women as well, but mostly boys who wanted that. But there was a question someone asked. I said, that's a wonderful question, gave a quick answer and said, that's something to explore in a class on philosophy. And the person who was watching me, teach the class said afterwards that the girl said to herself, I want that class. And I think that's the thing that's missing here, is engaging with modernity and doing it at a high level of Torah and really going into these questions about modernity, about feminism, about LGBTQ plus issues, is those are not being dealt with. And then when these young students who didn't hear anything about these questions at school go out into the world, they're not equipped to do it. The most amazing thing about my yeshiva is virtually every hot topic issue, we talked about it. And we were given tools and sensitivities. Again, not that I'm prepared for everything that can ever be thrown at me, but my school said, these are the issues that human beings are facing, and you need to learn Torah instead of, you're going to learn the whole Talmud with all of the commentaries on it, and then I'm sure you'll be able to figure out how to apply it to the world. It's not how it works. And I try and model that. I try and take on the topics that I hope are important and valuable and interesting to people, and then try and apply Torah sources to it. So this article is saying that that's not being done, and that is going to become an issue. You can either engage with the world and do it in a smart way from the teachers, or the teachers cannot prepare their students. And then when their students actually go into the world, they're completely at a loss. So what the future of modern Orthodoxy will be according to this really depends on what the educational institutions do now. And my children being in an Orthodox institution, it depends on where you are. Some of them do it well. A lot of modern Orthodox institutions won't touch any of these real issues with a 10-foot pole. And if the kids end up at university, it's sink or swim. And a lot of them end up sinking and losing their observance. And that's really sad, and they don't have to. They can be prepared for the world. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on the second article? Yeah, Ed, go ahead and unmute yourself. Hit it.
So neo-Haredim, what would be the difference between them and the traditional Haredim?
You'd have to ask Jack Wertheimer. I would say that there's that these rabbis he's identifying at neo-Haredi, they're the students of like Rav Soloveitchik and his children and his students. So they have a lot of those modern Orthodox sensibilities, but at the end of the day, they're veering and turning way, way to the right in terms of engagement with society, engagement with non-Jews, engagement with culture. So practically speaking, they were raised in modern Orthodox institutions, but they're moving way to the right. So we're not talking about somebody who was raised in ultra-Orthodoxy. And by the way, all of these terms, which lack nuance, all of these movements are relatively young and post-Holocaust. In many ways, almost everything happening in Orthodoxy today is a response to the Holocaust, either trying to recreate that world or get away from what Judaism was beforehand. But neo-Haredim, again, are essentially modern Orthodox people who are just moving to the right and becoming Haredi, as opposed to having been so for generations. But again, email Jack Wertheimer and he might say, no, Rabbi Dinah got it completely wrong. But practically, that's my sense and context of what it is. Excellent. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions? Beautiful. So the third article here, now again, we're jumping ahead. We were 2014, now we're at 2018. And this is from the New York Jewish Week. And one of the things I said is that Yeshiva University no longer identifies as modern Orthodox. My yeshiva, my rabbinical school, does. However, when it started, Yeshiva University did identify as modern Orthodox, and saw YCT as a great threat and tried to undermine it, and still does in many ways. But now, practically speaking, YCT, Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, is the only modern Orthodox rabbinical school, and Maharat you could include in there as well, as it's ordaining women. But for traditional or historical male Orthodox rabbis, there's just YCT. Now, others might mention a school in Skokie that, relatively speaking, is a little bit more modern, but for all intents and purposes, it's YCT. And that's not necessarily good, not because YCT is doing anything wrong, but if YCT is in tension and conversation with YU, it's good for everybody. But if they're left to their own devices, they're not going to be in that discussion conversation. They're just going to move forward, and the modern Orthodox world, the Jews, aren't going to know who to look to. So this short article here is going to talk about the possibilities and challenges that YCT, and this article, again, written in 2018, when YCT turned 18. So they're old enough to vote at this point. So let's see, we've got Gloria. If you would please read this article, source number 3.
The aspiration of Haredi leaders to rebuild the world lost in the Holocaust and revive Torah scholarship largely has been realized. Once considered moribund, Haredi orthodoxy is here to stay, and given high birth rates, already comprises 2/3 of the Orthodox community. By contrast, modern Orthodoxy over the past decades has often appeared in retreat from its bold vision, defined by the pluralism, intellectual openness, and commitment to social justice. At century's close, a group of modern Orthodox leaders coalesced to establish Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, YCT, as an alternative rabbinical seminary designed to be inclusive of all Jews, open to a range of diverse perspectives, and serve as a corrective to modern Orthodoxy's rightward drift. Although indebted to the scholarship of the classical yeshivot of Eastern Europe, the YCT curriculum owed much as well to the Western European rabbinical seminary models, including critical scholarship, cooperation with the liberal movements, and passionate embrace of Zionism and Jewish peoplehood.
I'll say before you go on, two quick things. You said alternative rabbinical seminary, which makes it sound like something else. It's alternate there, but this article is certainly a glowing analysis of the history of YCT. And I think that even objectively, I would say this is all fairly accurate. But the author here, Stephen Boehm, was actually one of my teachers at YCT. He actually taught a class, I think it was like on Jewish history, whatever. I really enjoyed learning with him. He really was an excellent teacher, but know that his bias is that he's a fan of YCT. You could find other articles that would not be so glowing or positive on this. But the reality is, again, YCT, whether you like it or not, is absolutely responding to the Harediization of modern Orthodoxy and just Orthodoxy in general. And they saw it as not being good for the Jewish people. And again, it's not even about good or bad. It's about what is appropriate for the Jewish people, what's going to be the most successful, what's right for them. And Harediization, this ultra-Orthodox shift, they're having 15 or 16 babies, but is that good for the future of Judaism? Is that something that is going to continue this almost stagnation and lack of engagement with the modern world? And YCT, and I agree with them, no, it's not. It might be great now because they're having thousands more kids than anyone else, but it's not a sustainable form of religion if you don't engage with the world. Please continue, Gloria, to be sure.
To be sure,
Sorry, I just did a quick scroll down.
To be sure, notwithstanding my identification with YCT's principles, initially I, like many others, was skeptical as to its future. To my mind, Yeshiva University remained the most important Orthodox institution in the US. I could not see how a startup rabbinical school could possibly compete for students and faculty. To the contrary, I believe that YCT's leaders would be better advised to remain within the YU fold and advocate for an alternative directions within it. Thankfully, the past 2 decades have proven me wrong. YC created an inspiring model of rabbinical training. Its graduates embraced the values of pluralism, gender equality to the extent compatible with Jewish law, academic scholarship as necessary for 21st century rabbis, and Israel as a laboratory for the application of Judaic principles to the real-life challenges of a modern liberal democracy. Communal leaders report that YCT alumni are respected for their success in building institutions that are open, inclusive, and engaging. Above all, YCT signals a refreshing change in atmospherics. Through the model of open-ended inquiry in research and teaching, YCT encourages questioning, debate, and open quest for answers to the major theological and halakhic questions of the day, ranging from conversion to Judaism to equitable labor practices. To be sure, YCT remains very much a work in progress, one that has experienced considerable growing pains, but whose most exciting chapters yet lie ahead. The stakes in its success are high for modern Orthodoxy and for the community generally. Orthodoxy is growing numerically, and its voices need to be heard. What is in question is whether those voices will be heard in a spirit of communal cooperation and principled pluralism, or whether its voices will fail to gain a hearing due to increased polarization.
Excellent, thank you. Now, if you were to talk to the modern Orthodox leaders, the founders of modern Orthodoxy, and let's say from 50 to 70 years ago, and you said, here are all of the decisions and rulings that are coming out of YCT, I don't think they would agree with all of them, and that's fine. That's the nature of the development of Jewish law. But if you said to them, YCT is trying to engage with the modern world and trying to having Orthodox Jewish law engage with it and be flexible where it's possible, as is appropriate for allowing people to live rich Jewish lives and be part of this world, on the one hand, or the other modern Orthodox rabbis are trying to stop that completely and disengage from the world, I think they would say, well, the first one is what modern Orthodoxy was always supposed to do, which is to engage with, go to universities, be part of culture, use academic, methods and methodology to study Torah. That's what modern Orthodoxy has been since its really earliest forms. Moving away from that is losing the soul of modern Orthodoxy. Now, again, with the earliest founders of modern Orthodoxy, that's Rav Soloveitchik, would he agree with every decision and leniency being made today? No, but that's not the fundamental definition of modern Orthodoxy, which is a problem. Because YCT, when they started out, anytime they made a decision that was different than what other institutions, why you would make, oh, they're not modern Orthodox anymore, they're not observant anymore. That's not only an oversimplification, but it's simply untrue. Jewish law does not work that way. Just because somebody makes a ruling you disagree with doesn't mean they're completely out of the camp. But that's exactly what was being said, as opposed to a methodology, which is, we are doing everything within the classical system of Jewish law, which again, is hard to pin down exactly, but really we can point to our sources. We're not doing anything that we can't back up. We're not doing anything that doesn't make sense for the state of American Jewry. We're not doing things we're not making rulings that are super far away from where people are. We're making rulings that are backed up by Jewish law, make sense, are appropriate for the Jewish people. That's what modern Orthodoxy is. But if you're going to say that as soon as you start making leniencies that are fully valid within Jewish law and absolutely appropriate and good, morally, ethically good for the Jewish people, you say you're out of modern Orthodoxy, then whoever's making that critique, they're out of modern Orthodoxy. So again, there's some subjectivity here, but ultimately, the only institution that's really trying to form or trying to live up to those values, regardless of their individual rulings and whether someone disagrees with them or not, is YCT. Now, on the other hand, YU, Yeshiva University, is practically, their rabbis are going out into the world. They're not living in insular communities. So the challenge here is they're living in the real world, but their education isn't necessarily preparing them to do that as much as it could. Again, I'm not here to attack. Someone could clearly say, no, Rabbi Dini, you're wrong. We actually have these classes and we do cover these topics. I'm not inside it to know that well enough, but I know that generally the things coming out of some of their leadership and the way that Judaism is being presented to those students is not conducive to where Orthodox Judaism needs to go to engage with, the LGBTQ plus community. The fact that there was a club for gay students at YU and it was totally outlawed and banned. That's not where Orthodoxy needs to go. That is completely ignoring the problem instead of engaging with it within the confines of Jewish law and philosophy, et cetera, like that. That's a clear example of moving away from the problem instead of engaging with it. Modern Orthodoxy needs to engage with all of these realities fully, and to ignore them or to outlaw them is damaging to both Judaism and the Jewish people. YCT is trying to do it, but they're also kind of alone in it. So it's everybody's picking on them for it. And they really have changed over the last 20 plus years and continue to do so. Any questions before we look at the final piece, or comments or responses? Excellent. So this final piece here is wicked recent. This is from, December of 22. And this piece is actually in response to the comments by two modern Orthodox Jews, one of them Ben Shapiro, who ethically and morally I am not a fan of, but he still, in terms of observance, identifies as a modern Orthodox Jew. And he said, him and this other person, Avi, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, Kaiment. Both of them said modern Orthodoxy is in big trouble. And this piece by Rabbi Judah Kerbel from Jewish Press is going to respond to that. And again, this is really in a lot of ways responding to a lot of the tensions and challenges we saw earlier. So I'll go ahead and take this last piece. So a number of essays recently published in the Jewish press, and particularly those written by Avi and Ben Shapiro, have highlighted some of the challenges modern Orthodoxy faces. Primarily, I don't want to disrespect him by saying his name incorrectly. I'll call him Avi. Avi primarily focused on the shortcomings in Torah observance among modern Orthodox Jews, while Shapiro primarily focused on the influence of liberalism on the moral ideology of modern Orthodox Jews and their institutions. Ben Shapiro, if you're not familiar with him, is a hardcore small c conservative person. And unfortunately, rather than that being a set of values that are well thought out, they often come out in very hurtful, negative, damaging ways, as the conservative speakers on the radio often do, which kind of diminishes his opinion. So if he says modern Orthodoxy is becoming too liberal, it's hard to kind of take his opinion so seriously when he undermines it by some of his opinions. That's not to say anything about him as a person or his personal views, but as a public figure, he again often undermines his credentials by saying outrageous things, which many of these right-wing speakers do. But regardless, both of these guys say modern Orthodoxy is in trouble. Okay, let's start from there. Whether or not one agrees entirely with their assessments, both made arguments that deserve attention. But if one accepts the premise with profound concern that modern Orthodoxy is in danger of losing its way in its adherence to halacha and or in its approach to contentious ideological issues, then does this mean that the future for observant Jews is in the Haredi world, where demographics are favorable, Talmud Torah and Tefillah, Talmud Torah meaning studying of Torah, thrive, and there is less confusion of where one's moral loyalties lie? I want to pause here for a moment because this is a really interesting development. In 2004, the concern was, where does Israel lie in it? Then it moved on to educational institutions and them setting people up for success. Then it was about the different ways that modern Orthodoxy, so that was the second article. Again, are these teachers preparing the students to be able to face the world? The third article is, what are the issues that modern Orthodoxy is engaging with? Are they engaging with relevant issues? Is there an institution that can lead modern Orthodoxy? And now this most recent article is saying, are modern Orthodox Jews going to be observant anymore? Are they just going to leave the movement altogether? Now, in many ways, this article is consistent with the challenges. If teachers are not preparing them for being part of the real world, these are the issues that might come up. People who leave modern Orthodoxy for communities to the right seek communities in which keeping halakha is the central priority. They seek more serious environments for davening and learning, and they may seek an environment where the worldview is more countercultural and less complicated than the modern Orthodox approach that seemingly dances between Torah and prevailing contemporary values. And from my own personal experience, as the author of this was raised in the conservative movement and then chose to be modern Orthodox. You ever heard anyone else do that before? And he likens that experience and he says that, you know, he was in a movement that wasn't fulfilling or whatever he left it. So to here, conservative Judaism 50, 60 years ago was much more observant and looked very different than it did today. Had I been born 70 years ago, I probably would have stayed in the conservative movement. The conservative movement, or the shuls that I was engaged with, didn't fill my needs, and I didn't see them as matching my values, so I moved to modern Orthodoxy. And what he's saying now, the same problem is happening in modern Orthodoxy. These Jews who want a high level of Jewish Torah-based education, a deep connection with God, with Hashem, and with prayer, and all of these things, and a rich, connected Jewish community, they're not finding it even in modern Orthodoxy anymore. So they're leaving it potentially for more Orthodox, and you'll find a lot of modern Orthodox shuls end up at Haredi shuls. And in their regular lives, they might watch movies, listen to music, go to theater, send their kids to university. But where they daven, they say, oh, the modern Orthodox shul is too liberal. It's too to the left for me. So they're at a shul that doesn't match their values at all. And that's becoming much more common than you can imagine. And modern Orthodoxy is suffering for it because modern Orthodox shuls, their membership's going down. But where are these Jews going who are truly modern Orthodox? They're going to Orthodox, Haredi shuls, etc. I have come to appreciate that in a certain sense, conservative and modern Orthodox ideology have some similar goals. They both assert the importance of religious commitment while adapting to society. They both believe that Judaism can be compatible with participation in society and academic pursuits. His definitions here are spot on, and he really is capturing the spirit of what I really think all Judaism should do, but certainly modern Orthodoxy. Yet some major differences emerge. To the extent that conservative Jews observe halakha, the movement has made halachic change a cornerstone of the effort to adapt to contemporary life. Modern Orthodoxy, though, does not change halakha or its principles, but may display some flexibility in terms of the contemporary application of halakha. This is an oversimplification of it, so we're not going to dwell on it. Still, modern Orthodoxy struggles with the inevitable dissonance between contemporary society and adherence to halakha and principles of faith. And again, if we're not preparing our students for this and they go to college, and they're really in a world of hurt. But if as a movement, you know, we're not even thinking about that, then we're really in trouble. So again, YCT is doing that, and it's really important, but it needs to filter down to the, you know, average Jew in the pews. If it seems like the Haredi world has more success in maintaining an environment conducive for religious growth, is it inevitable that every serious modern Orthodox individual will join a more right-wing community? And again, that is happening in many, many places. Even in shuls, they're not even necessarily leaving. Shuls are just moving to the right because they see that as the only way to save Judaism is to just be much more strict in dress, in composure, and how people spend their free time and their relationship with other communities. And again, maybe not sending your kids to university anymore. Modern Orthodox Jews are generally observant and knowledgeable. Even if there is room for growth in terms of the intensity of observance and dedication to Torah learning, it is also important not to understate the progress we have made in America in demonstrating that one can be observant while participating in the professional world in a meaningful way. Modern Orthodoxy has many communities with robust minyanim and learning opportunities. The modern Orthodox populace still buys into the importance of Shabbat and Kashrut observance. Our schools can count many successes in preparing students to commit to a lifetime of learning and connection with Hashem. While most people will acknowledge there are ways to improve our educational institutions, some shortcomings do not mean the entire system is broken, but a lot of it is. And I can name 2 schools immediately that come to mind that started as modern Orthodox elementary schools and then failed for a lot of reasons, and then were taken over by essentially ultra-Orthodox institutions that sort of pretended to be more modern in their outview and in certain ways compromised a little bit, but ultimately modern Orthodox institutions are becoming fewer and far between. Again, YU is the biggest example. They're not Haredi per se, but they're no longer part of modern Orthodoxy. So what's left? Who's leading modern Orthodox Jewry? There are plenty of shuls that 15 years ago that were modern Orthodox. And again, the rabbi would go to, an opera. I say that as an example because a lot of famous modern Orthodox rabbis would go to operas, even ones where women would sing. And they said, there's nothing inappropriate because this is not, erotic singing. This is not inappropriate singing. It's classical. It couldn't be, less exciting, if you hit me over the head with a brick kind of thing, not to diminish opera, but I don't like opera. But the point is, rabbis like this are becoming exceedingly rare. And these shuls are moving more and more and more to the right. And the few that are not are becoming sadly outliers. And they're losing members. And again, some are doing very, very well, but too many of these modern Orthodox shuls that 40, 50 years ago were bursting at the seams with well-educated, where half the minyan were PhDs and MDs. It's really hard to find shuls like that anymore. Continuing with the article, I certainly respect anyone who chooses, as a matter of principle, to identify with the environment of the Haredi world, which is essentially a rejection of society, a rejection of modernity. And also it's hashkafic, which basically translates to philosophy or worldview. However, for those of us who choose to remain within the modern Orthodox community, despite an acknowledgement that we could do better in our commitment to observance and learning, we are here because we believe modern Orthodox is fundamentally true. And that's the thing that I don't want to be lost from this entire class. Forget about how many kids we're having, who the institution is. At the end of the day, modern Orthodoxy is a fully observant, engaged Torah life that also values modernity, post-Enlightenment thinking, and think there's a value in this world, as opposed to the Haredi world, which fully values Torah life, which I love, but they reject the modern world as much as possible. They only engage, if at all, to the absolute minimum necessary. Modern Orthodoxy is a rejection of that value system, but it's hard to sustain it. It's hard to sustain going to university if university is really expensive, and you also have to pay for kosher food, and you can't work on Shabbat. There are a lot of things that being modern Orthodox specifically is wicked expensive. If you're living in an institution where the local school is the local rabbi and it's really, really cheap and everybody's on welfare, everything is, you don't buy clothes, you just get clothes from the family next door where their kids have grown out of it, which again, is not ethically or morally bad. That system is sustainable, but that's not the value system of modern Orthodoxy and conservative Judaism as well. And to an extent, Reform and all the other denominations as well, which was, how can Judaism be in this world? No matter how hard a community tries to isolate itself from the outside elements attempting to penetrate, nobody can entirely create an insular environment without any outside influence, even though many try. While worldly knowledge develops and does not necessarily represent absolute truth, there's no doubt that worldly knowledge is indispensable and enhances our understanding of the world. I love this, Rabbi. We live in a world in which professional involvement with society is necessary and enriching. Those are not the same thing. Ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews might say, fine, I need to learn English so I can have a job, so I can pay for my house. It's necessary to have a little engagement with the world. Modern Orthodoxy says there's value in it. There's value in culture and history and art. It is beautiful. It is part of this world that God created. With all the challenges this interaction with society poses to Torah observance, it is impossible and undesirable to avoid it. Even for those shifting to the right, while they may not want to identify sociologically with modern Orthodoxy, in practice, modern Orthodoxy is intellectually most consistent with the world they live in. So again, YU may no longer identify with modern Orthodoxy, but they really are a part of that conversation, which is why I think it's better for them to engage with YCT rather than, attack it or diminish it. They're still involved in advancing society at large, and they regularly use the worldly knowledge they acquire. Finally, while approaches to feminism and LGBTQ continue to be debated, it is modern Orthodoxy that is best positioned to navigate the challenges of balancing inclusion with halachic boundaries. A more hardline approach may appear to be most consonant with the Torah in an abstract way, but Torah was given to human beings, and Torah has to respond to the reality of the contemporary world in a way that promotes the dignity of its adherents. Modern Orthodoxy must succeed because the complexity of this worldview, as challenging as it is to convey the full complexity, most accurately captures the existential and intellectual experiences of our world. If you want to debate what's the best way to pray? What's the best environment for prayer? You say a Reform shul or an ultra-Orthodox shul. Okay, there's arguments on both sides there. But if you're going to say, what's the only way to allow Judaism to adapt and be interpreted and refined for this world that we live in, for those who choose to be observant? And that's an important thing. Many Jews just choose to not be observant, and a lot of these are non-issues. That's fine. But within an observant world where we want Torah and the values of Torah, and we want God to be a part of it, modern Orthodoxy is kind of the only option out there. And that's not a bad thing. It's a rich, beautiful tradition. But moving away from it and saying that, we just reject all of this modernity, we reject feminism, it's dangerous. That's not the world we live in. And it's just gonna, you shoot yourself in the foot. No community is without its flaws, which is true of the right as well. With all the flaws of the modern Orthodox community and the need to aim higher and inculcating spiritual experiences and attachment to the Almighty, the ideological component of modern Orthodoxy remains true. The Jewish community needs modern Orthodoxy. Our only option is to continue to nourish the soul of modern Orthodoxy. So having read all of these articles, knowing that, of course, there's so much more that can and is being said, I'll leave you with these several thoughts. Is every question, whether it was 2004 or today, they're all true. They're all relevant about modern Orthodoxy. But if you said, what's one simple practical thing you could do? We need more preeminent modern Orthodox institutions. And I don't want to say we need another Rav Soloveitchik. The days when you had the Rav or the Rebbe, when you had one figure who represented, or spoke to massive swaths of Jews, those days are over. It's much more spread out now, and that's not a bad thing. But we need more vanguard institutions, and that's included in elementary schools. My kids are lucky enough to be going to a relatively new young school that truly is modern Orthodox. The principal is my friend, but those are few and far in between. And I think this is true of all religion. At the end of the day, the success of any religion is really with the children and the way they're educated. And if they're educated by ultra-Orthodox Jews to be ultra-Orthodox, then they're either going to say, well, this doesn't work with the world that I live in, so bye-bye Judaism, or they'll choose to live in an ultra-Orthodox community and reject the world. But if you have institutions that are creating a beautiful Torah, God-filled life with observance and Jewish law and everything that is flexible, adaptable, and appropriate for the world that we live in, then when these kids go out in the world, they're prepared and they can actually have success at all of these institutions. The future of modern Orthodoxy is in the teachers and the institutions, and we need more of them out there, in shuls as well. But again, whether they're moving to Israel, they're moving to the right, or they're just not becoming rabbis anymore. And that's the thing I didn't mention. There's way too few rabbis, particularly in modern Orthodox. The classes at all of these institutions are shrinking. COVID did not help, but we need leaders. And I want to say very explicitly, this is men and women, and they do not need to be ordained to do this. Both men and women can teach Torah that is appropriate for this world. But that's the key success to modern Orthodoxy. But the underlying value is what Judaism has always been, which is to bring God down to this world, is to respond to this world. And it's always adapted to it. And now post-Holocaust, it's moving away from that. And we need to rekindle that fire. And it starts with educating ourselves and our children.